Hi, my name is Christian Jett, and my presentation is on the evolution of prosthetic design. So the first thing that I want to talk about is I'm going to be focusing on design, the evolution of design mainly from the 18th and the 19th century, and I'll be focusing on three things. The first thing is three major problems that, in my opinion, were the most influential. The second thing are different methods that tried to improve said problems, and the third, what the final solution was to the said problems, and how it affected the history of prosthetics going forward. So first I wanted to talk about materials being used before the 21st century. So before 1858, when Douglas Bly took his prosthetic that had many luxury materials to the New York State Fair, many of the materials used in prosthetics were very non-flexible, non-durable, and they contained things such as wood, iron, metal, and vulcanized rubber. And the second thing I wanted to talk about was a shrink socket, or lack thereof. So before 1863, when the shrink socket was fully implemented in Parmley's prosthetic, many prosthetics had shrink sockets that didn't fit around the limb, and that led to decreased stability. And the third thing I wanted to talk about was single versus multi-axis prosthetics. And again, until 1863, with the creation of the multi-articulated foot, single-axis prosthetics were the main way that prosthetics were formed. And again, they had decreased stability and durability. And so why does this matter? So I like to focus on the evolution of the prosthetic design from the 18th, 19th century and before the 21st century. Anything before software, design software was formed, as design software can only do so much if you don't have a solid base to go off of, which is what I'll be talking about and how that solid base was formed. And then also, I wanted to talk about why it also matters in terms of amputees in developing countries that don't have access to prosthetic clinics, as they're very spread out. And many of the prosthetics that amputees use in developing countries are based off of earlier designs. So if they know how it works and how they can fix it themselves, they don't necessarily have to go to these clinics. So in terms of materials, I'm going to be talking about silicone used, aluminum used, as well as Douglas Bly. In terms of single versus multi-axis design, I'm going to be talking about Parmley's usage of India rubber. I'll be talking about Blutchford and Sons Corporation. And then in terms of shrink socket, I'm going to be talking about Parmley's 1863 prosthetic. And in this picture, you can see Douglas Bly's below-the-leg prosthetic on a patient. And in 1858, he went to the New York State Fair and won the competition for Best Invention. And in the Best Invention, what he did was he used $1,500 worth of materials. And while they were too expensive, it led to this, which was in 1909. D.W. Dorrance used aluminum and aluminum alloys to make lighter and cheaper prosthetics going forward. And then the next major shift in materials being used will be in the 1950s, when silicone was being used in the medical field. What silicone did was it allowed the shrink socket to actually have to actually mold to the below the leg and arm limbs to have a safer, more secure fit. And speaking of shrink sockets, that's what I wanted to talk about next. And in this picture, you can see in 1847, a man named James Pott was tasked with the creation of making what this is called, which is the arm's-length leg. And what this leg was made for Lord Ulrich, and Lord Ulrich didn't want to have people looking at him differently, so the shrink socket was made to look just like a human leg. But now, Du Bois-Parmely was actually able, in the early 1860s, to increase the usability of this shrink socket by using something called India rubber. And India rubber, or natural rubber, is something that is derived from trees mainly in India. And what he did is he put it on the insides of shrink sockets to add additional grip to the limbs, as well as more comfortability. And then finally, in 1863, he created what was called the greatest prosthesis of its time, and that was this. And it was called and it had a polycentric knee as well as a multi-articulated foot. And while those don't relate directly to the shrink socket, without the stability that the shrink socket provided, the other two things wouldn't be as effective. And then finally, I want to talk about single versus multi-axis design. But first, I want to go back to Ardois Paret's peg leg design. And what the peg leg design did is it brought the field of prosthesis popularity in Europe, specifically in France, which is where Parmley was able to develop his 1863 best prosthesis of the time. And then in 1863, this is a simple diagram of basically what that multi-articulated foot did. And What it did mainly is it increased stability and it emulated the movement of the actual human foot from heel first down to the balls of the foot, meaning that it could work on uneven terrain, which single axis prosthetics could not do at the time. And then finally in 1993, Blatchford and Sons did something with multi-axes with the knee, and it was called the Blatchford stabilized knee. And what it did is it had two axes parallel to the user's knee, which emulated the usage of the ACL and MCL ligaments, therefore increasing stability, and this design is still used to this day for knee prosthesis. So how does the evolution of these three things, what matters about it? And what matters is that current prosthetics, such as myoelectric ones seen here, if they didn't have the basis that these inventors made by fixing these three problems, the technology will be put on a faulty basis, therefore negating the actual effectiveness of the technology. And also, this is important that we have a solid basis as the rise for the need of prosthetics has been increasing. And you can see that from the statistics provided here. There are 400 to 500 amputations performed every day. 2.1 million Americans living with limb loss in 2017, and there's every 30 seconds that passes, there's a new amputation. So with the development of these three things, the point that I'm trying to make is that the evolution will never stop. As humans, we always want something better. And after World War II, veterans came together to form the AOPA, and what they did in doing this is to provide a community between amputees that could fight for better designs in their prosthetics. And while I can't speak as an amputee myself, I know that as humans, we always want to fight for a better standard of living, and we always want something to be as comfortable as possible for us. So due to inventors such as D.W. Dorrance and Dubois Parme-Lee, we were able to create a solid basis of prosthetics that we can now, with modern technology, build upon to create below-the-legs prosthetics seen there.